Hey friends, it's Abdu and Derek with Embrace the Truth. It's Monday, July 15th at 1:15 p.m. and we wanted to record something in the wake of what happened over the weekend on Saturday when former President Trump there was an assassination attempt on his life during a political rally there. And so we wanted to come with you with some thoughts on how we, as people who follow the Christian message, who follow the gospel, actually think about not only the violence itself, but also our reactions to it. So we're coming here with some ideas. So hopefully we can bring light instead of heat in an already very hot situation. So Derek, I'm really glad you were able to do this and on such short notice and pull this together while I'm out of the office and even not in the studio. So thanks for your availability, and thanks Zach for also putting this together.
Yeah, no, it's such a it's not to be overly sort of dramatic, but I think there are a lot of people, especially perhaps my age, who and younger, definitely younger, but where they're seeing this happen, and to them it's almost that feeling of, again, it's not to compare it exactly, but when 9/11 happened and that whole sort of, that couldn't happen here. Surely we're past this sort of a feeling. And yet it did. And it was just so surreal when I found out. My wife was looking on her phone and she said, "Whoa, Trump's been shot." And then she even said, "Oh, that's probably fake news. We should check that and see." Right. And then lo and behold, wow, that really happened. And that's something that you hear about, pre-World War I, lots of leaders were being assassinated. In the early 60s, lots of leaders were being assassinated. I think the last nearly successful attempt on a president was probably Ronald Reagan. And there have been some people since then that weren't presidents, Gabby Giffords and Steve Scalise. And but yeah, to me, it just felt like, and I watched the video like most people, you can't help but want to see what happened, and I was just tearing up as I have for so many things that's gone on this past year in the world and more. Yeah, to me it just felt like, I can't believe that just happened. And if he had not turned his head a second before that shot was fired, we'd be having a much different conversation today. But thank God he did, and we're not talking about the death of someone, of him today. Although someone did lose their life, of course, a firefighter who was protecting his family, and some other people were injured. But I'm curious to know, like, where were you, and what did it feel like to you? We're let's say roughly the same age, and but you have the that same sort of, we probably both remember Reagan, but we were after the era of the political assassinations that, when you had two Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King and all of that. How did this hit you? I was just in shock, and I think I'm still in shock a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I still am to a degree as well. I remember where I was. Obviously, this is one of those moments where you will remember where you were when. I remember Reagan. I remember being downstairs in the family room of my parents' house, watching television, and it cut over to news footage of Ronald Reagan's attempted assassination by John Hinckley. And everyone has those moments. 9/11 is one of those. The reason why there's such indelible parts of our psyche now in our memories, I think here, especially in America, is because for me, what I thought when I first heard the news was, we are at a pivotal point. 9/11 was a pivotal point. I think even John Hinckley and things before were pivotal points. And what I mean by that, I'm quite literal about it. It's a time when we are at a point where we will pivot one direction or another. And there are numerous ones available to us. And we're at a pivot point. And we need to be pay close attention to that. I got a text from some friends who said, "Oh, I heard some bad news about Donald Trump. We need to pray for him." I don't know what that meant. So the first thing I did was turn on the television and then go to social media, because oftentimes news is pretty quick on social media, even as mixed of a bag as it might be. And I thought it was just he dropped out, he fell, he had a heart attack, who knows? But it turns out there was an attempted assassination on his life. So I was in shock. I said it out loud. I told Nicole, and we were sitting in my living room, or my family room when we got the news, and we started to scour the internet for these things and find out what this is all about. And is this a real thing? Who knows? You know, in these kind of situations, people say things when they heard something happen or whatever, and when they write about it. And it turns out, yes, in fact, it is real, and it really did happen. And someone tried to murder a political candidate in the middle of a rally on the eve of the national convention for that political candidate's party. What I felt was not just shock, but incredible dismay at the moment. An incredible dismay because of that pivot. And I felt this sense of the evident nature of our culture's soul sickness. And it didn't just come from the attempt on Donald Trump's life and from the subsequent death of that firefighter and the injuries to the people around. It really was evident to me because of the reaction on social media. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was an attempt to find out and diagnose what's going on in our culture right now. But the first thing I did after getting the verification that it in fact was an assassination attempt and keep the news on in the background, I went to social media to see what was in fact trending. And my heart was very sick because what was trending were things like, how'd you miss? And people who were lamenting the lack of success of the attempted murder of a political candidate. Despite, we can disagree with people, even adamantly disagree, and even dislike people. But to ask questions about, boy, I wish he hadn't failed in his attempt to take a person's life, is just evidence of our soul sickness. I did tweet about it and put on Instagram and Facebook and got lots of reaction. Grateful that there was reaction to people saying, yes, we all need to search all of our hearts. It wasn't just people who were on the right saying we need to do that, or people on the left saying that. It was everybody saying we need to search all of our hearts, for which I'm grateful. But that, my guess is disproportionate to the number of people who thought, boy, I wish he had succeeded in doing this, and that's awful. Yeah. And so my initial reaction was this sense of soul sickness, a collective soul sickness for, I think, culture broadly, but American culture specifically. And to borrow from Michael Ware's book, the title of his book, The Spirit of Our Politics, has become really just an expression of the spirit of our age, where the polarization and the demonization and the hate that is endemic is equal opportunity. It knows no ethnic limits. It knows no political limit. It crosses aisles. It crosses rooms. It crosses every single heart. And that was my reaction to that sense of soul sickness that I think we're broadly experiencing as a culture.
Yeah, and to me, it's the reaction to it is the same vitriol that you saw leading up to. Again, you're talking about the polarization, and it's sort of when everything is painted, and this is a not to be both sidism type thing, but it is a both sides. When the enemy is painted as whoever it is, as some sort of fascist or communist, or whoever is it, is he Mao or is he Hitler? Either way, that puts things in a certain light that ratchets up the sort of the heat, as you put it earlier. And so when these things happen, you have to take a step back. And that's one thing I did appreciate about President Biden's response afterwards was, okay, there's something going on that we've really got to tone this down, and we all have to do it. And but the response is so I guess in one sense the response is surprising and yet not surprising. And I talked to someone who is very even-headed typically this weekend. I was talking about it, and they said, well, yeah, that's clearly that's bad. And there's almost this sense of some people have felt like they have to say it's bad, but they, they're kind of like, I know it's right to say this is bad, but yeah, he kind of needs to be taken as, and they even said, if it was natural causes, that's fine. I want, that would be good if that happened, but being shot, that's obviously bad. And to me, it's still that soul sickness, that bloodlust that we seem to have in our culture for political enemies. And the very person who took the shot, whether it was a political shot that he took at Trump, or just the sort of the youth that's been made fun of a lot and gets this weird sort of apathetic hero's journey idea and wants to just take out someone and make a name for himself, that we see so much in our country. Whatever the case is, it's not different. And if we think that the way that we solve our problems is to destroy our enemies, and of course, it is related. I know you mentioned this to me earlier. It is related, I think, even a bit to kind of look at the other side for a minute, the way people were thinking about the debate that took place and watching the debate. And I'd love to hear your, the similarities between the two, again, are somewhat striking and concerning for where we are, where our souls are as a nation. And especially as, the Christians who take part in this too, it's interesting. We used to be chased by lions in the Colosseum, and now we've become the lions when it comes to some of these, politics. Seems like, well, it's okay if it's politics, because politics is just a dirty business, and it's okay to sort of not be a Christian in those scenarios. Yeah. And of course, that's wrong. That's pragmatism of some sense. So, what do you make of just even that? Like, there's already something's going on here.
Well, I think that we have to make an introspection. All of us, each one of us, has to search our own hearts.
Yeah.
I think that our polarization and demonization is at a fever pitch, but our ability to see each other as beings made in God's image, no matter how much we disagree or even dislike people, that's at a dismally low. Mm-hmm. I think the debate is a good example of how we need to search our hearts as well. Now, there's not a moral equivalency, I think, to wishing someone dead or making fun of somebody because they happen to have cognitive decline on national television. That's not the same thing. But I want to ask each one of us to check our own hearts. When we tuned into the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, many of us tuned in for the entertainment of the circus and to see if it might be the case that someone who is in cognitive decline will display profoundly that cognitive decline so that I can laugh at that person and then make judgments about that person in and of the decline itself. I know we need to see, and we need to be very careful we say this correctly, we need to see if the candidates who we're being voting for are competent to hold the office they're supposed to hold. And so in one sense, we need to see that information. I'm not talking about the information. I'm not talking about the performance on the debate. I'm talking about our reaction to it. Were we gleeful in watching someone who is made in God's image perform the way President Biden performed at that particular debate? Or were we just informed and say, okay, we now know? Or were we concerned? Did we express concern that someone who is experiencing the difficulties he's experiencing as a leader, who Christians are commanded to pray for, was experiencing and expressing some serious cognitive difficulties in the middle of a debate? If we're there to see him perform badly so that we can almost salivate at it or rub our hands together about the tweets we're going to send out immediately, I wonder if that's a similar kind of attitude where we're not looking as Joe Biden as a being made in God's image for whom Christ died. Just like if we see President Trump, former President Trump, get a shot across his ear and think, boy, I wish he would have moved an inch away and we could have watched him die on television. We're not seeing either of these two men, and therefore I think indicative of how we see each other. as people made in God's image. And that is the soul sickness. It's not a disagreement over policy. We need to have those things. It's not a desire to see if the person is, qualified to be a candidate. We need to evaluate that stuff. Of course we do. But it's our heart attitude. It's our glee at seeing someone either almost lose their life or perform the way President Biden did at the debate, and then be happy about the state of affairs and be gleeful about it and take to the airways making fun of, in some way, the situation. I think personally that a nation that was founded on the idea that all men are created equal, all people are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that being the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that those rights are inalienable. If we're founded upon that principle, as stated in the Declaration of Independence, and I think later enshrined in all of our legal codes, with that implicit assumption, then all means all. We're all created equal, and we're all created equal because we indelibly bear the image of God, that and we're made in His image and after His likeness. And if we lose that, we're going to be in some very serious straits. Do I think there's a way back, though? I think there is a way back. I think it is hearkening back to the things that founded us in the first place, that caused the states to be united, even when there was tremendous division. I mean, this isn't the first time where division in our country has been bad and it resulted in assassination.
Yeah.
I mean, Lincoln was assassinated right after essentially uniting the country after the end of the Civil War. Lots of work to be done there.
Yeah.
So division is going to creep up, and the denigration of people is going to continue. But man, we need to return back to that great physician, and that's who is, I think, God Himself, because He forms the basis for us to believe objectively that those we disagree with are made in His image. And one last thought on this, Derek, is that we've gone from having political opponents to having political enemies. In light of that, two things spring to mind, and I think it would be obvious to anybody as soon as I say it. When Jesus says to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, I think it goes too far to call people our enemies. They might be political opponents, that's different. But to call them enemies, I think on either side, if you're on the right and you're calling people your enemies, who are your fellow Americans, that's a thing that we have to wrestle with. And if you're on the left and you're doing the same thing, we have to wrestle with it and wrestle with the fact that these are the consequences of that kind of rhetoric on either side or on both sides, because it is happening that way. So we're called to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. But it's also interesting to me that when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment is, His answer was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your strength, all your soul, and all your mind. And then He says, and the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then someone asked, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus didn't answer the question by saying, your neighbor is this person. He didn't answer it that way. Instead of answering, who is your neighbor, Jesus says, this is how you are to be a good neighbor. And He gives the story of the Good Samaritan. And oftentimes in common parlance, we think Good Samaritan. We don't know where it comes from. It comes from Jesus. And He uses a Samaritan because Samaritans at that time were hated as either enemies of the people religiously or politically, or just social pariahs. And Jesus makes a parable where a Samaritan, someone no one likes, is the hero of the story, because the Samaritan goes out of his way at his own personal risk and financial detriment to help someone who doesn't like him. And that's how Jesus says, that's how you be a good neighbor. Go and do likewise. That's how we regain, I think, a good spirit of politics with disagreement and mixing it up and having debate. And that's how we transform the gladiatorial arena of the current state of politics into and revert it back to the civil public square that it should be. I think we need to pay heed to that ancient wisdom.
Yeah, you reminded me too of I'll start with saying, that as we kind of I think most people recognize now, whether they want to accept it or not, a lot of Western civilization was founded on certain ideals of Christianity. And I think as we move away from that in the West, you'll see, you'll probably see more things like this, because you might give lip service to, oh yeah, we should be nice or whatever. But if you don't have the sort of core reason for that, you lose the purpose. And when purpose is separated from it, it just kind of takes on a life of its own, and our basest instincts come out. But because of that, again, because of that history, I know our friend Nathan Rittenhouse one time talked about how, the way that we are political enemies now, we demonize our political enemies, and the issue is there's no atonement for demons. And so it automatically, like you said, it's almost subtle, but it puts people in this category of, again, a term that kind of made the rounds, these deplorables. And, that's not to side with one side or another, but that is a symptom of when you are putting people in a certain place and not seeing them as very much like you, as people who are probably doing their best, who are scared like you are, who are trying to figure out how to live in the best world possible to take care of their family, take care of their friends. And I think that seeing yourself, it reminds me of that song by The Brilliants, which is a Christian band. When I look into the face of my enemy, I see my brother. Mm-hmm. And that's like there is a brotherhood and sisterhood of a siblinghood of mankind that I do think we've lost that story, and we're all in these fragmented stories of history is being rethought of as just the history of strife and oppression. And I wonder if we regained a better story and a better legacy somehow, if we could start even on that subconscious level or something, sort of even that story of a nation. We don't have that cohesive thing that once held us together and thought this is all ours to work on. And at some level, I know there will be people who can point out, well, it's never been a great nation for everyone. Mm-hmm. But there was still an impulse to make it that way from people of every color and on both sides of the aisle to eventually get it to where it was. And there is this fear of sliding back. What would you say is some practical stuff people could do? I don't know if you've thought about this, but it's one thing to say, let's reclaim it, but we know, and we've talked about this a lot recently, actually, we know some people don't believe in the Jesus story, and they don't like Christians, but what are some ways on a practical level that people can, is this a grassroots thing? Is this reclaiming your neighborhood, your actual neighbors, and creating community, and just something we have to do, everyone has to do where they're planted? Or how do we start to fix this? Because it just seems like a runaway train, with a lot of money behind it. There's a lot of money in polarizing politics because it's entertainment, mm-hmm. and it's part of the entertainment, business now, industry. Yeah. So what do we do with all of this?
Yeah, I think that there is the practical aspect of this is to not rely on social media as the sole place where you and like-minded people gather, because the algorithms are meant to polarize you, to segregate you into people who think like you do, and then to make fun of those who don't think like you do, and then to go further and then demonize people who don't think like you do because they're the radical weirdos. Yeah. I think we capture the sense of what it means to actually be human and think of other people as human when we actually interact with them on a personal level. Maybe this is a call to go back and not make such digital engagement a part of things, so that when our physical engagement happens, it's so violent and so rhetorically hot, as opposed to, it's very different. It's a very hard thing to do, to sit across the table from someone and who you like, or maybe even don't even trust or whatever, and vilify them right in front of you when you spend time listening to them. Mm-hmm. So I would say a practical thing at a grassroots level is to get to know someone who doesn't agree with you politically, and do the hard work of saying, I'm going to hear you and not interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to make an assumption about you. My assumption when I engage with you is that you are not seeking my downfall until you
Yeah.
prove me wrong. And make that assumption.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, and even say I'm going to make that assumption, and maybe even ask that that assumption be made of you. In our conversations. We're in an election cycle. We should be talking politics. We should be engaging in these things winsomely and with assumptions being made is that people who disagree with you aren't out to get you. They might be misguided. They might be wrong. They might be woefully wrong. But let's assume for a moment that they're as imperfect and no more imperfect than you, nor no less imperfect than you, and have those conversations. I think that's a practical way. And then I think the other thing is an assumption we can make in our engagement, whether online or in person, is to remember when we discuss these things, we think about ideas, not people, and equate them as the same thing. You know, a former colleague of both yours and mine was engaged in a conversation with one of the leaders of Hamas years and years ago. And this guy from Middle Eastern background was asked by one of the leaders of Hamas, what's the difference between Christianity and his ideology, his very radical political ideology? And he said, this is the chief difference. When you look at a person, you equate their beliefs with them. So the value of their beliefs is equated to the value of the person. And so when you disagree with that person or that person offends you, you therefore have the right to hurt them and to kill them. The Christian faith doesn't allow me to do that. Someone's ideas, someone's viewpoint is separate from their value. The value of their ideas is different than the value of them as a person. And so I can engage with and even demolish, as the Bible says, demolish lofty arguments and those things that don't make any sense, without demolishing the person. I think the practical way to move forward is to divorce the value of the ideas people have with the value of the person having that idea. And when we do that, we can engage without having to demonize.
Yeah. And and that's such an automatic thing. It's a hard thing to live, but so necessary. And I think, I saw a thing recently about the sort of the studies on how unneighborly and more individualistic we became at a point in our history. I think around the 60s, when people suddenly stopped sitting on their front porch and started putting out back decks. And so I want to be a front porch society again. And that's one even little small thing you can do in your neighborhood. Actually get to know your neighbors. Don't live next to them for 10 years and only see them pull in and out of their garage.
I think there's a call to return back to a sense of our humanity and not only our sense of humanity, but our sense of what it means to see other people as human again. And all that's gone on in the past 7-8 months or longer, going close to a year, are indicative of that sense of soul sickness. And so I want to return to one last thing, if I can say this, because we started off on this, and I think it's important for us to stick with it. We are at a pivotal point. We can pivot. Now, globally we need to pivot, but in light of what's happened recently, I think nationally we have a pivot point. We can pivot towards more hatred and more anger and more rhetoric that leads to more violence, or we can pivot back to a sense of understanding what it means for each person to be human and inherently and objectively valuable as people. We can pivot away from the hatred by seeing ideas as something we can debate and fight about, but not people. We ought not to denigrate them. So we're at a pivot point. There's a soul sickness, and I think there's only one place we can go for a cure. Only one person to whom we can go. But not everybody believes what I believe in terms of there being a God or who that Savior actually is. But in the end, I think there is a shared sense of that idea that we are created equal, that we are all equal in one sense. And if we can go back to that idea, and really cherish it, I think we can pivot in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. With Jesus, there's always hope. So we need to hold on to that and live like him and do what we can. So, well, thanks, Abdu. Obviously, we'll probably be talking about this kind of stuff again. And hopefully we'll have a better update video next time. But this was just a really important thing that we felt like we needed to talk about. So, yeah, to anyone who's watched this, join the conversation in the comments and let us know what you thought and how you felt when it happened. And, you know, be open and transparent. We'd love to hear from you and interact with you there. Very difficult time for our country. So, in the world, there's a lot going on. So, we hear you. We feel your pain right along with you. And, yeah, we love you. We'll be praying for you and for the nation. And, yeah, it's tough times, brother.
Yeah, but I'm confident. I'm eternally the optimist. I think we can pivot.
Yep.
I think we can pivot in the right direction.
Yep.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks,
Awesome.
Zach. Thank all of you for viewing. We hope this has been helpful. God bless you guys.